Welcome to Weekly Infusion with Dr. Drew Pinsky and Dr. Bruce Heischober. Weekly Infusion addresses medically related topics. It's in the know, entertaining, and everything you want to know about health and medicine. Now may I present to you the very wonderful Dr. Drew and Dr. Bruce.
So welcome back, Weekly Infusion. Hey, Bruce.
Hey.
So this is our experimentation with the serialized Weekly Infusion.
Yes.
Literally, and we will be sort of paying out this story, this medical mystery, where a group of young teenagers who were working during the First World War painting dials on navigation equipment became later in life chronically and severely ill and died. And because of the good work of a pathologist, they were able to figure out what this was. And Kate Moore has written a book about this. We can now describe the book. Kate, welcome back.
Thank you so much.
So tell us about, the book is called, The Radium Girls, The Dark Story of America's Shining Women. I can't read today. I had radio care time. The Radiation Girls, The Dark Side of America's Shining Women. And let's talk. We'll talk about what you mean by shining women towards later on. But let's talk about how what this product is and how they figured out what it was doing to the women.
Well, the product, as you say, the material is radium, and to our modern mindset, we immediately think that's radioactive, and in our modern mindset, we think that's a bad thing. But you've got to remember, at the time we're talking, which is the First World War into the Roaring 20s, radium was considered to be a cure-all and a health boon. You know, people thought it was good for you. And so people literally drank radium-infused water as a health tonic, to ward off ill health. The recommended dose was 5 to 7 glasses a day. So, and as I say, radium was in everything. You could get radium cosmetics to, face creams that would make your skin glow because radium has luminous properties.
Wasn't there a stone container, and the type of stone to hold water would give off radium, so you just kept putting the water in the...
Yeah, it was. There were loads of different products actually, but yes, that was one of them.
What is this? What is it? I'm sorry.
Because with antique, I used to be interested in antiques more, and they can still be found. They're made of some sort of stone, I believe, or ceramic. I can't remember what, but it gave off.
I think they're called refrigerators or something like that.
Yeah. And
they were painted with radium or something?
I think it was in the ceramic in some way, but it would continue to give off radium. So all you had to do is keep filling it with water, and as it came
filling it up with water, and then
And is radium strictly mined, or does it have to be produced in some way?
It has to be refined.
Yeah.
So it comes from an ore, and then it's put through lots of different refining processes, which takes ages. And from a whole ton of the ore, you only get 5 to 7 milligrams of radium.
I think Madame Curie went through 1,500 tons of pitch black, something like that.
Yeah, pitch blend ore.
And why was she so intent on finding this? Do we know?
Why was she so intent on finding it?
Yeah.
I think it was scientific curiosity. I think it was, I might be wrong, I think it was in uranium.
It was a uranium byproduct, right.
And she figured out that there is something else in here. Like there's too much radioactivity. There must be some other substance. And so she was refining and eventually found, isolated radium as a thing. And it was immediately embraced. So, the extraordinary thing about this story is my book opens with a prologue dated 1901, where a scientist suffers a radiation burn from carrying a vial of radium in his pocket. So from the turn of the century, they know that radium causes radiation burns. They know it eats into human tissue and destroys it. But because this is science, they think, well, how can we use this incredibly powerful substance? And so they put it to use in treating cancer with remarkable effects. And it's important to say, cancer is still treated with radium today. It's still used in medicinal ways. But what happened?
Radium implants.
Yeah. And what happened is when they saw, oh my God, it cures cancer, it saves lives. This is an incredible, benefit and discovery for health. the company started thinking, how can we exploit this, incredibly powerful substance? And so they thought, okay, we know that it's dangerous. We know it eats into human tissue, et cetera, et cetera. But what if we only use a tiny amount? Perhaps if we put that into pills, we can say it cures hay fever and gout and impotence. And that's what happened. And as I say, they did conduct research to find out if it, did have any benefits. But it was the radium companies making money out of radium that funded that research. So they got the results they were looking for.
And when you said it's purified, what does that mean? How do they do it? What's the process? Do we know?
They put it through, I think it's like 900 different refining processes. So it has to sit in a vat for a month. There's lots of, they're treating it with different stuff, and it's complicated, as I say, about 900 different refining processes. I wonder how they
figured that out. It's so strange, right?
Well, they were able to isolate uranium, and uranium on a uranium, then you end up with lead. So I think you'd probably use a similar process, just looking for a different atomic weight.
I guess that's right. Yeah. I guess that's true.
And then that stuff makes radon. I guess radium breaks, and the radon, that's been another health scare, and the accumulation.
And to come back to that, that was one of the ways they were able to determine that it was radium inside the women that was hurting them, because one of those tests that Harrison Martland, the doctor who pioneered the discovery and solved this medical mystery, one of his tests was to do a breath test with the women, and they were looking for radon in their breath.
That's
and it was
crazy
there
that he was able to think that through and be able to come up with something to test for at that period of history.
He was a brilliant man. As I say, this was like totally pioneering, stuff. As I say, when the girls began to get sick, no one knew what it was. Everyone was misdiagnosing them. And it was Harrison Martland who was the one that proved that it was radium inside them that was breaking their bones, making their teeth fall out, and killing them.
The play you directed in 2015 was These Shining Lives. And was he in that play? Was his character there?
No, because These Shining Lives is about the Illinois women, which come from a little town called Ottawa in Illinois. And so the play I directed was about the Illinois women. My book talks about the New Jersey women and the Illinois women, but Harrison Martland was based in New Jersey, and it was the New Jersey girls who got sick first. And one of the most shocking things to me about the story is that Molly Maggio, who I talked about in the first episode, who was actually one of the first girls to get sick, who suffered that awful scene where she went to the dentist and he pulled her jawbone out of her mouth. She was actually the first radium girl to die on September 12th, 1922. And only a few days after that death, that is when, in the local paper, the job advertisement ran for the Ottawa studio. So the first girl has died, and suddenly a whole new town, a whole new generation of dial painters are going into exactly the same job. And that's why it became so critical for all the radium girls, and I've talked about Grace Fryer and Catherine Donahue. They really led the charge, and this was a charge not only to try and hold the companies to account for what it had done to them individually. This was also an altruistic battle to protect other workers and other women.
We're looking at the some of the malformations caused by this.
Pictures of the jaw that came out. How long did it take for them to actually wipe out this practice in business and industry of using radium in paints and being exposed to it? I mean, were there people doing this in the 50s and 60s, or?
Yes, there was.
How could that be?
What they did was so, as I say, it took an awfully long time for people actually to acknowledge that it was radium, that something needed to be done, that safety standards needed to be put in place, and so on. Eventually that did happen, and it was entirely due to the Radium Girls that I write about in my book that people accepted this was happening, and those safety standards were put in place, and they were actually based on the bodies of the women who had come before. Harrison Martland and other doctors, including Robley Evans, studied the girls. They looked at the bones. How much radium do these women have inside them? What might be a safe amount. And they did things like Rob Lee Evans, for example, designed different studios so that people had kind of ventilation hoods over their workspaces that would try and suck up, all the dust and any bad stuff that was kind of around, that sort of thing. So they put safety standards in place. And one of the most extraordinary legacies of the Radium Girls is that it wasn't just the radium industry that they affected. It was all the radiation industries. And that is true even today. And I've had some lovely emails from people that have read the book who have written to me saying, either I work in a radiation industry or my son or my daughter works there. And people today will wear, for example, a radiation badge that measures how much exposure they've had. And if it gets too high, you stop, you take an enforced vacation and so on. And they say, I'm so grateful to the Radium Girls because it was because of these women that we knew it was dangerous and these safety standards were put in place. And that applies to the Manhattan Project as well.
Oh, wow.
As an insomniac that watches too much middle-of-the-night TV, there's class action suits based on asbestos and mesothelioma. Did anything like this? I mean, this is it probably stopped longer in the past, but anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a story of kind of female friendship. So it was very much a kind of the women clubbed together to fight against these firms. So Grace Fryer was, one who led the charge. She and 4 of her colleagues had this very high profile, internationally famous court case. And Catherine Donahue, again in Illinois, she led the charge with her friends as well. And it was very much a group effort between the women.
And what was it about those cases that they're so well known? And who were the attorneys? How did they approach it? Do we know that?
Yeah, it took a long time for the women to find a lawyer. And again, this is part of the problem when you're taking on a massive, very powerful, very rich corporation. So the women took a long time to find a lawyer. And in the end, Grace found a lawyer called Raymond Berry, who was young. He was under 30 when he took the case on. And he was the only lawyer who would represent them. Everyone else wanted money up front. But he took the case and fought for the girls.
Think about the paradigm shift that now people look for powerful companies to go after because they know they can expunge money, squeeze money out of them. Then they were afraid to attack big companies.
Yeah, and that was even more true with Catherine Donahue in Illinois because, as I say, the Illinois women, their studio only opened in 1922, and given how insidious this disease is, it takes years for it to show itself, for the women to start sickening, and so on and so forth. So by the time Catherine is suing her company, we're in the midst of the Great Depression. So you talk about not wanting to take on a powerful firm. Well, that is even more the case when there are barely any employers left, and the Radium Girls were shunned by their communities for speaking up about this.
Taking jobs away.
Trying to hold the company to account. And they actually had to look outside their town. There were several, I think there were 41 attorneys listed in the town directory at that time. None of them took the case. It was a Chicago lawyer called Leonard Grossman who stepped up and worked pro bono for Catherine Donahue and her friends to fight this case.
What was the outcome?
The outcome was that the firm was found guilty. They were found responsible for causing the ailments to the women. Unfortunately, this isn't one of those stories where you really feel, yes, the company got shafted, in the end, because the way it had worked was the company had fled the state. They left a $10,000 bond, and that was the only pot of money that the women had to share between themselves. So again, this is not a story where a courtroom drama is about the kind of big win at the end. The win is the moral victory, the fact that these companies who have lied to the women in the most egregious way, and these companies stopped at nothing. They lied about the women's medical test results. They interfered with autopsies. When the women are literally dead and should be left in peace, the companies actually interfered with those autopsies to try and cover up what was happening. So it's a moral victory that finally, despite that shadiness, despite the callous way they responded to their employees dying, these companies were exposed in the light of justice and found to be responsible.
Was there a political Ralph Nader back then, or was it the medical community who spearheaded OSHA being developed and industry change?
I've mentioned some of the doctors and lawyers who helped them. I think it's also important to say, particularly at the time we're talking about, which obviously is a time of female empowerment, women working for some of the first time, women getting the vote and so on. This was actually a piece of history where women stepped up. So Frances Perkins, the first woman in a presidential cabinet, was involved in the Illinois women's case. She Tom Donahue, Catherine's husband, was in contact with her. She was trying to get investigations going. I have to say, I think she was a bit kind of stymied by the fact it was the Great Depression. So these investigations would start, and then, it was much more important to deal with the economy and things like that.
The people needed a job so they could eat, even if they were killing them with the jobs. Yeah. So, but let's talk a little bit about, if you don't mind, we discussed all these health fads and the spas and the waters and everything. Yeah. But there was the cosmetic piece you'd mentioned in the last episode. We can talk about a little more detail now. Part of the appeal of this job, before they knew it was dangerous, these girls would get the product to paint on themselves, right?
Yeah, exactly. We've talked about how it was lucrative. So these girls were glamorous because they could afford to wear silks and furs. But above all else, it was glamorous because they got to work with radium. And that was twofold. A, because radium had this, fabulous reputation. It was sung about on Broadway. Celebrities went to these radium spas. So to be working with it was extraordinary. And of course, the other glamorous thing about it was that it was luminous. So if you think of yourself as a young teenage girl, going to a place where you end up literally glowing in the dark because of the stuff you're working with, you're going to exploit that. You've been told it's safe. It's safe because you can see the radium cosmetics on the shelf at the drugstore. And so these girls would, paint their fingernails with it. They were actually encouraged to paint their kind of dress buttons and buckles. And so some of them, took that, they'd go into the dark room and have fun with each other, painting moustaches with the paint, and just giggling at the way they look, because all you could see was the kind of funny eyebrows and, the comedy chin and that sort of thing in the dark room. They thought it was perfectly safe. And Catherine describes, so heartbreaking now, thinking of their innocence, how they would wear their good dresses to the plant. So when they went out dancing in the speakeasies and the dance halls after work, the dial painters would be the glamorous girls glowing in the dark, doing the Charleston in these shimmering dresses that had been covered in the glow of radium paint.
Wild. And then finally, you had mentioned that, or someone had mentioned to me that the workplace safety organizations like OSHA grew out of this. Can you tell us how that happened?
Yeah, well, it's to do with the legal battle, basically. At the time the Radium Girls got sick, there wasn't really, it was very much the start of industrial, health reform, compensable diseases and so on. And there's actually another book also called Radium Girls by Claudia Clark, which describes, very detailed the legal legacy of these women, how they were at the forefront of, challenging the perception that companies could hurt their workers and it didn't matter. You think of some of the scandals that we had at, the end of the 19th century into the beginning of the 20th century, the match girls dying from, phosphorus poisoning and things like that. It was commonplace, people gave nicknames, didn't they? Fossy Jaw was something crazy that they got. People, working with mercury or all these different chemicals. It was commonplace that people died. But actually, the Radium Girls were one of the first kind of group of employees to stand up and say, you know what, this is wrong. And through that legal battle, they set these legal precedents. They overturned legislation. People got so heartbroken by what had happened to them that the public supported, new laws coming into place to protect workers. People were up in arms about what had happened to the Radium Girls.
I'm thinking about the culture at the time a little bit too, and workplace safety was sort of lack of safety was sort of a foregone conclusion. People would be in mines, they would die on the railroads, they would get black lung, and it's just, well, you take your risk, you want a job, here it comes.
It's a catastrophic event. There was a big fire in New York City, I think it was around 1914 or 18.
The shirt waste.
Right. And that changed a lot of...
They created fire escapes because of that, and that building is now the NYU library or administration building.
I was just down there.
Yeah.
Now, my father's 95, and I remember when I was a little kid, him talking about, I got to watch those luminous dials on old watches. How long did they continue doing that?
I remember seeing them as a kid.
Yeah, right.
I remember them. And my understanding is even in 1978, there was still something going on to that effect. Is that correct? Back in Ottawa, Illinois, per se.
In Ottawa itself, you're absolutely right. This is, again, a really shocking element to the story. So we talked earlier about the Radium Girls' legacy, how they, their deaths led to safety standards being put in place. Their sacrifice was not in vain. People were protected. But unfortunately, safety standards only keep you safe if the companies that you work for use them. And what happened in Ottawa, Illinois, is that a separate firm, but run by the same man who had poisoned the original generation of Radium Girls, he set up a new company that opened just down the road on Clinton and Jefferson Street in Ottawa, Illinois.
Oh my God.
And he was lax in safety, And, again, a shocking element, there were workplace inspections, inspectors raised concerns, but no action was taken. They'd get a slap on the wrist and they'd say, we must do better, but nothing improved. So it wasn't until 1978 that the company was actually closed down, and it was only because they switched to a different substance. So the NRC had to step in, and they were much more kind of authoritarian, as it were. So they had the power to shut down the company. But they found that radiation levels at that studio were 1,666 times higher than was safe. This had been going on for decades.
Crazy.
And of course, it's not just the radiation levels and the contamination, it's the people that work there. And several of the women who worked at this second company got sick, they got cancer, they died, they had identical symptoms to those that we've described earlier. Teeth falling out, bones hurting, and so on and so forth, and breaking.
To connect the historical dots a little bit, I think Ottawa was one of the stops in the Lincoln-Douglas debate.
Oh,
I think.
It was, yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah,
I think it was one of the inconsequential ones, but it still was an important city historically.
Any companies still doing anything like this where the employees are subject to toxins or radium?
Well, yes, there are, is the simple answer. I think this story has so much relevance today, not least because, we live in a day and age now where people kind of laugh about health and safety. It seems like a bit of a joke. And I think stories like the Radium Girls remind us, people died for the protections we enjoy, but also that we need to remain vigilant. Just to give you some examples, and I'm sure there are cases in America too, but for example, in India, in the tannery industry, people are dying from the chemicals involved in leather production. You look at the working conditions of those building the football stadiums in Qatar. Even modest figures put the employee death rate there at one worker every 2 days.
Oh my God.
So, these are really shocking things. And in the UK as well, there are cases almost, there are regular cases where safety standards aren't followed and people die. Deaths that could have been prevented are still going on in the workplace. So I think it's a lesson that we need to remain vigilant and cautious. And for me, because I fell in love with these women, they are extraordinary women. The book, The Radium Girls, is their story. It's got their voices in, their court testimony, their letters, their diaries. And for me, I want them to be remembered. And I think the best way we can remember them is to listen to their story, where a company put profit before people, and to try and honour their legacy in ensuring it does not happen again.
And the way that will happen, the way you'll hear their stories, is when you pick up The Radium Girls, the dark story of America's shining women, and you read it and you hear their stories. Kate, I really appreciate you joining us. Your website again?
is kate-moore.com.
Kate Moore. I look forward to this being a film. I don't see how it could not be. At least a Netflix film. At least Netflix.
I hope so. The girls certainly deserve one. So fingers crossed.
All right, we'll take a little break. Come back with some emails. Kate Moore, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hydrolight, of course, you've heard me rave about these guys. It's a product that I actually wanted to develop myself. I conceived of this. I knew it was needed. It was already in Australia, and now it is here. It works. The feedback is unanimous. Even though it's great to use, though, when you're sick or dehydrated, you can use it every day, especially now that the weather is changing. It's hot. So whether you're exercising or maybe you got seasonal allergies or you drank too much or you got vomiting or diarrhea, whatever it might be, you can reduce fatigue and keep feeling healthy as well. Once you've started feeling dehydrated, sometimes a little too late. So you want to stay hydrated. And rapid rehydration, if you do get dehydrated, requires a proper balance of sodium, glucose, and water. And nothing provides it like Hydrolight. I'm telling you, it's the same as an IV fluid via your mouth, via your enteral system. It's based on established, proven science, quite simply the best rehydration product out there. It comes in great flavors. They have those fizzy tablets. Also, they have a powder and a premixed drink. Compared to other sports drinks, Hydrolight delivers up to 4 times the electrolytes with 75% less sugar. Hydrolight solutions are appropriate for all ages, and each bottle or package includes easy-to-follow directions. All right, you can find Hydrolight at Rite Aid or online at Amazon or click through at drdrew.com. And for more information, visit hydrolight.com. That is Hydrolight, Hydralyte, hydrolight.com. We are back. That was interesting, right? Very interesting story. Yeah, great storyteller. I like the way she. I look forward to it as a film. And I look forward to reading the book.
Yes.
So we have some emails. Let's get to it.
Okay, this one compliments you, Drew, on having been a huge fan of Loveline days in the current podcast.
It may not be me. It may be Adam that she's a fan of, after all.
Okay, so this is Megan, and she is about to start working as an internist, hospitalist, and wondering...
As a hospitalist?
Yes, if you have any thoughts.
No, she's starting her internal medicine residency, as I read.
Let's start as an internist, specifically a hospitalist.
Oh, good for her. Oh.
So any thoughts on how she should respond to a patient who asks her first name? Young female, and I'm told that I'm attractive. Found in residency when patients ask the first name is a harbinger of boundary violations.
She's right.
Either ask her out, or few pages have blatantly stalked her.
Oh, my God.
Scary stalking where they waited by her car,
Oh,
etc. And
no.
not as much of a problem with male colleagues wanting a way to establish boundaries. That's, I have a feeling when somebody starts calling me by my first name, now if it's Dr. Bruce, but when they just call me Bruce, I feel like that's a boundary violation. And I don't. It
categorically is, and it's a way of knocking you down so they don't have to put you in any position of authority when you give them guidance.
Right.
And it's sometimes a way of not listening to you. It's sometimes a personality style where they're just not comfortable if that isn't the case. But in her case, I mean, she has really serious consequences if she isn't able to establish boundaries. I find it interesting that she knows so clearly what's going on in this question. I mean, that she needs to establish boundaries, and by insisting that somebody call her Dr. So-and-so, that will help establish that boundary. There are probably other ways as well, right?
Right.
And I'm surprised people didn't go over that with her in residency a little bit. But go ahead.
You get into some real areas of being politically correct.
Well, I find this interesting because people don't know that doctors have to deal with this all the time.
Right.
Because we're trying just to do what's right for the patient. And if we are not in the proper relation with the patient, in other words, if the patient has undermined the relationship in some way, we can't, that's our fault.
Right.
We need to get the job done in an effective way. And if it's somebody that we feel that we can't be chummy with because it's going to undermine their care, we have an obligation not to be chummy with them.
I think after time, too, some of the uncomfortable situations, I'm much more comfortable now saying, I'm not your friend, especially with I have a lot of young adult and late teen addicts, and saying to them, I'm not your friend, I am your physician.
Yep.
And especially manipulative patients, learning about personality disorders has been very helpful.
But I know, and you and I have worked in the psychiatric setting forever, and she's just starting as an internist. And I know what that's like to start as an internist with not really understanding the psychiatric piece and how they clean up on the internal medicine docs, because we're so focused on doing good, helping, getting good outcome, making everybody happy. We're just trained that way.
Right.
And at least she has an awareness, but probably because of these adverse experiences, that she has a bigger obligation here in terms of navigating and I don't want to say controlling, but establishing her caretaking relationship in a more sophisticated way. And it's hard, and she's going to have to develop her own style with it too. I mean, definitely no first names for her, for sure, unless it's a well-established patient. I mean, some people would say, on psychiatrists, they would only do it for a reason. You know what I mean? They would have to be able to defend it to somebody who's watching their work. Why are you doing that? What is it for the patient that you've chosen to do that? Right.
When I used to do lectures for emergency medicine residents, talking about there's the mini mental status, but there's also I would tell them really study up on personality disorders and start
so that's something we can
the transference, countertransference issues. When you start having a certain feeling, when they generate certain feelings within you, what's really going on there?
Well, at least there's a personality disorder operating because you feel it in your gut or wherever. Some people in their chest,
right?
And then you sometimes need to. Maybe you're someone that is easily manipulated. Need to recuse yourself from the case.
But in emergency medicine, are they making you angry? Is there a reason there that you feel that way, or are they manipulating you by that anger, or trying to create a false empathy to get something else they want? But some of these things are very valuable as a physician.
Right. Do you want to get into that a little bit?
Sure. Well, somebody that's borderline personality disorder.
Well, that's. But in her case, she's getting in these. Let's try to stay with her case.
Okay.
She's getting in these men that are violating boundaries, so they can get in a seductive position. Right. And so she should start to be aware of what that feeling is she gets when they get that way.
Yes.
And have develop a specific response. Any suggestions to her? Other than no first names, that's good.
The area that gets a little bit controversial is how do you tell a woman versus a man dress-wise? Or do you...
Well, I would say she could dress however she wants, but she's going to create more challenges for herself if she chooses to be provocative.
Right.
It's going to be She's going to create more trouble for
her.
So if she doesn't want that trouble, okay.
And also tactfully, I'm nothing personal, but if somebody has abuse, sometimes people project.
Yes, when people have abuse in their past,
Right.
they will recreate those things in the present.
Right.
And that's a really good point. And if she has that heritage, if she's been sexually, physically abused, or somehow even these covert abuse, we can explain what that is. She should get that treated.
Right.
She should really look into that because I know myself. I had not so great boundaries when I started practicing, and it took years of therapy to really get it going. And I'm so glad I did that. And I another little technique I use, but I don't see how you can do this unless you've sort of been in therapy, is learn to be accurate, reflecting the affect of the patient, appreciation of the patient's mood and affect states with facial expression, rather than and maybe even acknowledging what they're feeling in some way, because sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But so when you can signal it with your face, that tends to create a boundary. Does that make sense?
Right. And that goes along with there's this huge emphasis on the motivational interview and using the patient's own, I think motivational interview, but also I think reflecting back some of that content.
Talk about the motivational interview.
Oh, you talk about it. I'm terrible at trying to encapsulate motivational interview, but
it's trying to get the motivation to grow out of the patient, to propose things that gives the patient the spontaneous ideas that create the motivation. About that, is that about right?
Right. I think that's intuitive. When I had that training, it was sort of like I think the more codependent someone is, the more they tend to use that. They tend to use
intuition.
Intuition, but I think there has to be a balance between getting into the patients and using their own machinery or their own feelings about something.
Give an example how you do that. If a patient doesn't want to take a pill, how do you create the motivation? You've got high blood pressure, you're going to need to take a pill. I know you've tried everything, diet, blah, 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 you've lost weight, you're going to need to take a pill.
I'm just terrible at
bringing it out. Okay. But you sort of start with, what would it look like if you didn't take the pill? And I wonder what that'd be like if you did. Wonderment is a useful tool in this area.
Or in substance abuse, when somebody has an addiction problem, that's a huge area. Or with some of the mental health issues, I think that's. But I think the other thing I was thinking about, they say everybody in psychiatry should be be in therapy.
Yes.
And sometimes I think that everyone that's doing any kind of medicine where you're interacting with people,
it can help you.
a pathologist,
that's right,
understanding some of these, where you come from and what it sets you up for, because everyone has a different background they bring with them.
You been going to therapy lately or something? Is that you been back in therapy?
Yeah, absolutely.
Good for you, because it's true. What we bring to the relationship, it's important, and how we respond to the patient. We need to be sophisticated about that, not just adrift.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, really, what struck me was doing emergency medicine, then going into addiction medicine. I was surrounded by psychiatrists, and basically marriage and family therapists, and learning about how they approach patients. Like, this is what every physician in training should know.
I know. I agree. We just ignore that, especially on the medicine side.
Right.
Maybe the surgeons don't need it because it doesn't really matter to them, but on our side, for sure.
And getting feedback. I mean, the ideal situation, if she could have somebody that was adept at
evaluating her,
go around just for a few days or weeks and
give her
her feedback. Right.
All right, go to the next one.
Oh, yeah.
That was good. That was a good one.
That was a great one. Okay. My 16-year-old son has been prescribed Wellbutrin for depression and anxiety. He is also going through therapy. What else can I do to help him with his condition? He has SCIDS and has had 2 bone marrow transplants, but is doing good with that right now. Could this SCIDS be a source of childhood trauma?
Well, sure. It's like combined immunodeficiency, right? That's what that is. And so he's like the boy in the bubble. That's what that is. The people familiar with that idea. He reacts to everything in the environment, and they've given him a bone marrow transplant, which restores some immune function. But then I think to myself, oh, what about the meds he's on? And those could be causing depression, anxiety, and going through all that could cause depression, anxiety. Right? Of course.
No, I have 2 days ago, I had a patient come in. He's being studied. The whole family's being studied by Baylor, and he has combined immunodeficiency, and he had B-cell lymphoma already. And
oh my!
That's something I think there's definitely. I wonder what age this all started in this individual, because 16-year-old now.
Why does that matter? I'm not.
Well, at what stage he started having interventions? Because sometimes you're hospitalized and the.
Yeah, did he live in a bubble for a while?
Right.
Or did he start having bone marrow transplants as a child?
But Wellbutrin for depression and anxiety.
Not my first choice.
No.
At all. So I'm assuming that he's had other things. Because very few, I don't know where you would start with. Wellbutrin is not a good anxiety medication. I mean, it can be, but it's not typically.
Right. Yeah, no, the SSRIs and.
Yeah. And Neurontin, things like that can be useful. So. You might want to sort of revisit whether he's getting proper management and make sure he sees a psychiatrist. He's had certainly plenty of reason to have anxiety, depression.
Right.
And then therapy, too, for some kids
and
like
he's
that.
starting therapy. That would be the huge, especially 16. It's tough going through anything.
Oof.
Okay. I was born with spastic dysplasia due to the lack of oxygen in the womb. It just affects my legs.
Dysplasia. That doesn't sound right to me.
DISPLEGIA.
Dysplegia. Yeah.
Something I've been used to since I was born, but I do have moments of wishing that I wouldn't have to deal with these cards that have been dealt to me. When I was a baby, I was diagnosed with full-blown AIDS.
Oh, my goodness.
Very sick, supposed to be on hospice. My mom tried everything, forcing me to pure fat at hopes of the disease turning around. A fat diet, pure fat diet.
Weird.
For seizures.
What was that all about?
Well, they do it for seizures, I believe.
Yeah.
I was the first infant in the world from the NIH back around 1995 when the epidemic was severe to be on protein inhibitor. That was a groundbreaking success. Medication saved my life, but also swelled my brain too much, so that could also be because of my cerebral palsy.
Oh,
much more I could do. I have a lot of issues.
What a medical nightmare.
Yes. And born with spastic dysplasia and then AIDS. And I know a lot of patients now that we're seeing people that are on long-term medication for HIV/AIDS, and some of the they're talking about brain swelling, but also unusual fat accumulations, and some things that are. Have you seen any of that?
No, tell me about that.
Well, I don't know that much about it, but
body adipose? No,
yes.
But body fat distribution.
Right.
Huh.
Right.
And people don't like that? Is that what she's complaining about, you think? Or he? We don't have to he or she?
It's Erica, so
okay, she.
It's she. But the long-term inhibitors causing brain swelling. So,
I haven't heard her question yet.
If you ever have time to hopefully contact me, I appreciate it. There's much more I could tell you. I think it was
she just wants some
describing
support.
Her situation.
That is spectacular. I mean, she would be a good Michelle, she would be a good guest. I mean, it's a medical incredible. That she's still with us is sort of phenomenal. But I don't blame her for being...
she was at that time when it was just as the medications were becoming available and more effective, so she had
the benefit of that. But I'm not sure what she means by brain swelling. Is there brain edema? Or she means normal pressure hydrocephalus or something?
That's from a viral
something, and they get those leukoencephalopathies and things. I don't know. Anyway,
yeah, she'd be a great guest.
Why are you laughing?
It says help me, Dr. Drew.
Help me what? What? That's what we.
So she wants your suggestion.
On what? We haven't heard about what yet.
Adjusting to her situation, it sounds like. Well, maybe we can email her and get some more definitive
Yeah,
questions.
I think we ought to talk to her. I'd like to talk to her.
Okay, and this is from Jason. I've been taking about 10 to 12 tramadols a day for 5 years for chronic knee pain. Like to know what damage I'm causing myself. I've tried to stop, and the withdrawals are horrible. I work 40 hours plus a week and have 2 kids.
Yeah.
Can't take time off. Is methadone an option?
Oh.
10 to 12 tramadol a day. The maximum for adults is 400 milligrams, and I think for geriatrics, 300 milligrams, with the risk being it has sort of one side's like effexor, one of the molecule, the other side like codeine. A lot of people don't realize
it's an opiate,
straight up. Receptor
straight
agonist.
Up opiate. Let's call it what it is. So this is opiate addiction, and he appropriately is asking about treating the opiate addiction, but he
can't
going
taper.
to methadone. Is methadone going to get sort of sidelined by suboxone? I mean, because methadone's...
I think so. I think it's a type of patient. I think, but I don't know. I have many patients on suboxone. I mean, what I would try, and again, for me, it's there are choices. Why tapering isn't working with him with some clonidine? I mean, I don't go right to suboxone. But if I were going to choose, he's got chronic pain.
No, he's got chronic pain because he's on the opiate. The pain will go away when he comes off the opiate. Trust me.
Well, no, I agree with the hyperalgesia, opioid-induced hyperalgesia, but unless because you think at his age,
it'll be a 3 on 10 as opposed to a 15 out of 10.
Exactly, right. So that's why the first thing I would do is taper with clonidine, or just
get him off.
Get
him off,
completely stop.
And ideally, he should be treated for opiate addiction. I mean, that's what this is. It's possible it's sort of one of these pseudo addictions that we're seeing so much of these days because of all the doctor prescribing of this stuff.
Right. Well, 10 to 12 a day. For 5 years, he hasn't increased use. I have a lot of patients that come in like that.
Oh, yeah, it may not be. It may just be dependency.
For me, it's convincing them about the opioid-induced hyperalgesia and saying, look, this is 90% of people like this when they completely stop.
Pain
They're
goes away.
Shocked at how little pain they have.
That's right.
Yeah.
You got to get them through the withdrawal when the pain intensifies, by the way. For a few days, it gets a lot worse. But he needs to, I mean... At least he's somebody that understands opiate addiction. Now, I need to know, was he addicted to anything else before this? Does he have alcoholism in his family?
History,
that kind of stuff.
Right,
yeah.
Right.
But let's define what we mean by opiate-induced hyperalgesia. You and I have talked about it before, which is that people, when they take opioids, are not a treatment for chronic pain. This is in the literature over and over and over again. A small percentage of patients might be able to maintain on a very low dose for a long period of time and be pain controlled. But if your pain is with you and you're taking a modest dose of an opiate, the opiate is causing your pain. And the vast, vast, vast majority of these people have marked improvement in just taking off the opiates, period.
Right. And once it gets into the downward spiral of more and more, I mean, we were looking at our statistics at our hospital. We had somebody on 1,100 morphine milligram equivalents a day. And as people are taking more and more, they have less tolerance for pain, and it actually amplifies the pain.
It amplifies the pain. They're in chronic withdrawal, and they're having hyperalgesia. I mean, the pain is intensified. The brain effects of brain is worse.
Right.
And the insular cortex, which is the misery in part of the brain that registers misery of pain, is firing out of control.
Right. And patients are coming in. I get referrals all the time. They're angry. Why did my doctor do that? You explain opioid-induced hyperalgesia. Then, well, why would they give me more of this? Why didn't they tell me sooner? This is a fairly recent understanding that we have.
You don't understand? Are you kidding me? I've been saying this for 15 years.
Well, the opioid-induced hyperalgesia and the basic science behind it.
15 years I've been talking about it and been screaming about it, and my patients I get them off it. They're tap dancing. They don't have pain. They go back to their pain doctors because they're drug addicts. I treated addict, not just dependency people. And they would put them back on, and then they would die because they'd put them on a benzo and an opiate, and they'd be dead in no time. Right. And so it made me crazy. So I'm glad people are finally coming to terms with this. It's taken many, many years. Bruce, when Heath Ledger died, I announced, I'm seeing this every day. This is the lip of a tsunami. And that was, 12 years ago or something? And I was seeing it all the time. All right, we're going to wrap it up. I want to thank our friends at Hydrolight. I am living on them right now. I explained it on the Nicole and Jemmy episode. Hydrolight, of course, is a replacement, fluid replacement, enteral fluid replacement. It's equivalent to an IV. We love this stuff. They come in these little fizzy tablets, and we thank them for supporting us. It's great for hangovers. It's great for if you've been vomiting, if you're exercising, if you're just hot. I'm sorry?
If you're having eye surgery.
And in my case, I'm trying to stay hydrated following a radial keratotomy. Consult the Nicole and Jemmy episode where I explained it.
Right.
And we will see everyone next time. Yep.
Sounds good.
Remember, you can find all these podcasts at drdrew.com. The Dr. Drew podcast, the This Life podcast with Dr. Drew and Bob Forrest, and the Adam and Drew podcast, which is available 5 days a week. Find them all on iTunes and rate us 5 stars. Subscribe and get it first. And if you're really happy, click on the Amazon banner at drdrew.com to help support the show. We'll thank you for it. If you join the email list via drdrew.com/contact, we'll send you a weekly infusion newsletter with Dr. Drew's news. We're so grateful when you get in touch. We read all your emails and we'll bring you the subject matter you want to hear about.